Evening, Dr. Pavan Duggal, Ved Kumari ma'am, Yogesh sir, and all of you present here. I would quote Dr. Duggal himself to begin with the session by saying, "This era of pandemic is a golden time for cybercrimes to get executed effortlessly." And yes, that stands true as well when we evaluate the emergency factor of the human behavior and the ongoing situation. Hence, we have with us Dr. Pavan Duggal, who will be a guiding light for us to become a warrior in this battlefield of cybercrime arena during these tough times. I am Prakhar Mishra, co-convener of the Social Media Committee, and would be starting this session by introducing Dr. Pavan Duggal as the magician in the field of cyber and e-commerce law who has left no stone unturned to achieve the pinnacle of his career. He is a practicing advocate, along with being a member of NOMCOM committee, being the conference director at International Conference of Cybercrime and Cyber Law, and also is the chairman of the International Commission on Cybersecurity Law. We know that you have the knowledge of words speaking continuously for days, but we firmly believe that even a few minutes with you would prove to be an elixir for us. Now, I would request our Vice Chancellor, Professor Ved Kumari, to welcome you with her enlightening words.
Thank you very much to the Social Media Committee for organizing this at a very short notice. And as an LUO family, we know that why was it urgent for us to have this meeting? I certainly believe that we all need to educate ourselves of the etiquettes in the cyber world that we need to follow. As we are all aware of etiquettes in the real world, so is the cyber world. And I think it is very important for us to understand what is inappropriate behavior in the cyber world. And it is not only inappropriate, but what is a criminal behavior on the cyberspace. And that is why we thought that Dr. Pavan Duggal is the best speaker for this one. He has been practicing in this area and certainly runs a whole university to educate people around the world on cyber crimes. And I think for students, it's very important to understand that you are at the very beginning of your lives. One mistake at this point of time in your life can really hamper your whole future. And whole future not only in your profession, but at all levels of communication, because cyber communication is going to be the way of life for us now. Whether pandemic or non-pandemic, one we got exposed to, more and more things will move on to the cyber world. And once we are going to be communicating in the cyber world, so we need to learn to communicate effectively there. And I think what we do not understand perhaps is that comparatively speaking, it's easier to delete your footprints in the physical world. It's almost impossible to do that in the cyber world. And that's the point I would think that Dr. Duggal is going to emphasize upon. So you may close an account, you may delete your email, you may delete your computer, you may kind of format your computer. I think 7 times, if I'm correct on this one, you can recover deleted materials up to 7 times also. I think this was a few years ago when I learned this. It may be even more now. That just because you delete something, it doesn't exist here. Forensic science can still locate what you all did. And in case of students, if anybody was to get into the realm, whether in the cyber area or other criminal activity where an FIR is filed against you, that's really, really horrendous. It can be a very minor offense of just being abusive. Once an FIR is there, your whole career is at stake. You can't get a passport, you can't get a visa, you can't get admissions, you can't get a recommendation letter. 1,000 things follow in your career and in your life. So I think today's my whole aim in welcoming, inviting Dr. Duggal, and he very graciously accepted in within 2 days notice to us to agree and come to speak with us. I really want him to focus on this whole area of cyber crimes. What are the whole range of activities which amount to crimes, for which actions are there? We need not worry about what the punishment is because we don't want to even go there. But we want us to be educated about how the cyber crimes are investigated, because I think that's where a lot of solace comes in. It is an anonymous account. Nobody knows who is doing it. Nobody knows till the time you get to the IP address. And it is very to locate IP addresses in today's technology. So therefore, to assume and be bragging about it that, oh, it is anonymous, therefore it doesn't matter, nobody can reach me, it's a false security. You have to be aware that it is easiest to locate you in the cyber world than it is, I think, in the physical world. And I think these are some of the aspects which I hope that we will be deliberating upon. I would encourage the participants to speak up and clarify their doubts at the end of the day. And certainly, I'm not going to speak much today, but I just wanted to put this background that today's meeting is specifically focused on the issue we're facing presently, where some students are complaining cyberbullying and some students are denying that no, our action did not amount to cyberbullying. So I think that's certainly one area we want Dr. Duggal to put some more light onto this, that what amounts to various offenses and especially the cyberbullying category, but certainly all others as well. So with these words, I'm really happy that Dr. Duggal, you are here. We are looking for long-term collaboration with you. And this is certainly an area which is growing both in terms of knowledge as in terms of criminality. So very welcome to NLUO. I think this is your first visit to us, even though virtually, but very welcome to the NLUO.
Thank you, ma'am, for your kind words, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. Professor Ved Kumari is an institution in her own self. I have known her for last so many decades, and it's always been a pleasure because I keep on learning everything every time I interact with her. Today, when we talk about cyberspace, we forget about two fundamental paradigms that we need to always keep on a 24/7 basis in our minds. First, that internet as a paradigm never sleeps. Number two, internet as a phenomenon never forgets. So once we start understanding these two units of this phenomenon that's engulfed our lives, you begin to start making sense of how to deal with this paradigm. In fact, it's been more than 50 years since the internet was first invented by Sir Windsurf and Bob Kahn. Since then, it's traveled a long journey. But it was the coming of the World Wide Web in the early 90s which made it so easy for all of us to access the internet. More and more people coming onto the digital bandwagon ensured that a lot of activities started getting done in cyberspace. But cybercrime was something that was always on the network from the time of the World Wide Web itself. People suddenly found this fantastic place of complete anonymity, and people realized, look, here is something that I can do everything that I cannot do in the physical world because people are watching me. So lo and behold, this false sense of anonymity effectively led people to believe that they could be doing what they wanted, and they landed up doing a lot of cyber criminal activities. Cybercrime as a paradigm has been growing with each passing day, with each passing month. And I think I have some case studies to share that with you. But prior to doing that, since the Honorable Vice Chancellor wanted to talk about cyberbullying, I can tell you, cyberbullying is a completely gray zone in India. You don't know which side of the road the camel is going to sit. Therefore, if you are either engaging in cyberbullying, or if you're either wanting to be a silent spectator while cyberbullying happens on your network or in your presence, or you want to be just a mere silent victim of cyberbullying, in all three circumstances, you are going to be potentially at risk or danger. The first circumstance is, if you engage in cyberbullying, don't think that India doesn't have any law. Yes, you're bang on target. There are no direct provisions on cyberbullying. But does that mean that the law enforcement cannot go after you? The answer is a crystal clear no. The law enforcement agencies can go after you for a variety of crimes. They may not be able to directly cover cyberbullying as cyberbullying because the Information Technology Act 2000 is silent on cyberbullying. But having said that, there are so many provisions under the IT Act and under the Indian Penal Code which can be invoked. Under the IT Act, let's understand the band. The band of imprisonment begins with 3 years and goes up to 10 years, and sometimes even life imprisonment. the band of fines for cybercrimes under the IT Act begin at 1 lakh rupees and go up to 10 lakh rupees. Further, when I look at the band of offenses under the Indian Penal Code, which can be invoked in the context of cyberbullying, 3 years is something that you should definitely be aiming for. However, in certain circumstances, some cyberbullying could effectively be inviting a jail term of 7 years imprisonment and fine. So the initial thought process that because cyberbullying is not covered under the Indian cyber law, we are hunky-dory, we are all fine, and we can end up doing anything what we want to do, is clearly a mistaken notion. Because we are now doing so many of these instances of cybercrimes in the educational sector, and in the education sector, cyberbullying has emerged as the #1 sector cybercrime as far as India is concerned. So I would want to share with you certain parameters of how the law is evolving, and then come back and regain this discussion and tell you about certain nuances. I will also show you how certain cases have happened in educational institutions in India and what could be the ramifications. Look, the problem is this lockdown has completely warped our visions. Yes, we've never seen something like that in our lifetime. So because we are alone at home, there are two constant companions that are accompanying us on a day-to-day 24/7 basis. These two constant companions are fear and panic. And then both of them mix up in a cocktail that often leads to very undesirable results. No wonder we have begun to see this undesirable results having a direct impact on a massive increase in cybercrime globally and in India. I would want to take you through to certain case studies, and then let's come back to this entire proposition of cyberbullying in an educational institution, what could be the ramifications, and how specifically educational institutions need to deal with these matters, and also how students and teachers need to handle with the same, because this is not going away. You may be lucky as an institution, you may not have faced something, or if you have faced, then there'll be need for evolving appropriate strategies to deal with the respective challenges. I have a small presentation. Let me have that presentation before I start this. So I was asked to talk about cybercrime investigations and implications generally, and then we'll come back specific cyberbullying as a paradigm. The problem is the worldwide ecosystem is seeing massive cybercrimes happening. Recently, there was a big cyber security attack on a major pipeline in the US. And that's led President Biden to come up with a new executive order on cybersecurity. 59% of Indians have been now subject to cybercrime in the last couple of months. And I believe these figures are wrong, because basis the work that I do on a daily basis, I can tell you almost invariably every second or third person would either have faced cybercrime or would have somebody in their circle who would have faced cybercrime. Well, by the end of 2020, the world had lost more than $6 trillion to cybercrimes as a cost of cybercriminal activities. But that's not alone. By the end of 2021, the world should lose more than $8 trillion due to cybercrime. And by 2025, the figure is expected to go to $10.5 trillion. And cybercrime is happening all across. There's no denying the fact. Nobody is immune in this space. I think one thing that we have to be thankful or unthankful to COVID-19 is that it has ushered in the golden age of cybercrime. Why? Because cybercrime was existing for the last 50 years, except the kind of quantum, the manifestation, and the new kind of mutants and avatars of cybercrime that we have begun to start seeing during COVID-19. We have not seen that earlier. And mind you, this is the beginning of the golden age of cybercrime. It's not getting over soon. So we have to now be prepared for a new life where cybercrime will be a constant companion. But this cybercrime is not just in the corporate sector. It's targeting governments, targeting critical information infrastructures, power sectors, banks. And of course, now with online education coming in a big way, that has also caught the attention of cybercriminals. Now, here was a case of a disturbing footage of a Maltese student, a Malta who was sexually exploiting female educator. And that's something that I've also begun to see in the Indian context. I've got a case recently where in an online class in a school student has gone ahead and tried to, by verbal means, sexually harass the teacher in full public view of the other students. Somehow the student was of the utmost confidence that, look, he's not going to be caught. What he didn't realize was that not only the school, but the service provider was maintaining logs. And much that though he had logged up with a different name, he was able to be identified. And now criminal prosecution is currently going on. So just one example to tell you, if you are using any kind of the electronic ecosystem for harassing someone, then don't think that you are like the invisible man and that you will be able to wipe out everything electronically. It's not possible. There are electronic footprints, digital dust, as I call it, which you are leaving behind at every nook and corner of your activity in cyberspace. That's why we need to appreciate that every activity that a person does in cyberspace has got cyber legal ramifications. And ignorance of law is no excuse in the eyes of law. There is yet another case from Agra, where the Agra student was detained for creating teacher's fake profile, projecting her as an escort. Now, we've had these problems in educational institutions where students tend to take offense to certain teachers, try to bully them, try to trouble them, try to harass them in the physical world classes as well. But those have been manageable exercises because you're visible. You can actually be seen in class. Your activities can be visible to others as well. In cyberspace, somehow students still feel that they're anonymous, which fact remains is that they're completely wrong in their perception. Unless until you're very, very tech suave and sophisticated, the chances are that you will be identified based on some of the digital footprints that you will be potentially leaving behind. So I know this yet another case in India where the student started in the class asking the teacher in the online class a question pertaining to what was being discussed, and quickly said that, sir, last night I just happened to view the footage of the CCTV camera, the spy camera that I have put up in my parents' bedroom to find them engaging in all kinds of intimate activities, and how do you think we as students should deal with it? Now, that had got no context with what was being discussed. But clearly, a lot of girls in the said group found it offensive. Complaints were made. And then right now, the school has decided not to legally prosecute, but to counsel the student and counsel the parents of the student on how they need to be careful when they do their activities online. Now, here is yet another case where it's now an emerging trend. The online classes tend to get disrupted. Earlier, when the pandemic began and when we came in the lockdowns, it was a different ballgame. We were not prepared for this. The work from home paradigm is something that had never happened in the Indian context. So people started accepting Zoom without understanding its salient features, its security practices. So the initial days of March, April, May, we began to see in 2020 a lot of Zoom bombing or Zoom jacking cases. These were cases where the Zoom meeting would be disrupted by third parties. They will either make a lot of noise or publish obscene content. I myself have been a part of a Zoom meeting where I was called to address a gathering on a conference, and then somebody from apparently one of the African nations hacked into the Zoom meeting and displayed all kind of obscene content, which then led to so much embarrassment that the program had to be discontinued. So the fact is, if you are going to be part of flood of obscene, abusive messages, then please realize that you are actually playing with fire. Why? Because under the Indian cyber law, the moment you publish, transmit, or cause to be published or transmitted in the electronic form, anything which is obscene, anything which is lascivious, which appeals to the prurient interests, or the effect of which is to tend to deprave and corrupt the minds of those who, having regard to the relevant circumstances, are likely to see, read, and hear the same, you actually commit an offense under Section 67 of the IT Act. 3 years imprisonment, 5 lakh rupees fine on first conviction, of course, much serious on the second one. If you are actually publishing content which has explicit sexual content or conduct, then you are playing with a much bigger fire, because it's a more serious offense, punishable with 5 years imprisonment and 10 lakh rupees fine under Section 67A of the IT Act. And should you be engaging in child pornography, including publishing or transmitting the same, then it's another another 5 years imprisonment and 10 lakh rupees fine under Section 67B of the IT Act. In this case, yet another very important institution, Symbiosis, had to go to police over a false replica of the institute's website. So it's not just sadistic pleasure of obscene content being targeted on the target persons. It's now targeting institutions, organizations, individuals, educationists, teachers, and other stakeholders in the education ecosystem, which is being started a problem. No wonder this kind of confusion add further confusion in the form of hackers hacking into the vulnerability of systems, and of course, launching ransomware attacks. That's become very popular and common. And now we are beginning to see low-grade ransomware attacks targeted at educational institutions in India. They'll suddenly send you a computer contaminant, a malware. It's going to enter into your system. It's going to encrypt all your data, and then it's going to ask you some money. Not very big. These days they begin by asking 25,000, 50,000. And you pay that money and then count your blessings. If you're lucky, they give you access back. The chances are most of the time you're unlucky and you don't get the monies back. That's the reason why the University Grants Commission has specifically been very sensitive of these cyber-related matters. And it's now come up with new guidelines, specifically in the context of protecting females online, in terms of ensuring that tender minds are not exposed to content which could corrupt their minds in the coming times. Well, whether we like it or not, cybercrime is here to stay. It's no longer a kind of a Western phenomenon. This is something that's happening on a day-to-day basis. We had heard about Jamtara in Eastern India prior to COVID-19. But now I've begun to start seeing the mushrooming of Jamtaras in different parts of the country. In fact, I call it the cottage industrialization of cybercrime in India. Cybercrime has become a cottage industry, and it's getting mushrooming in tier 2, tier 3 towns, cities, and it's broadly a very, very broad term. Almost any activity that you do online, which either has a criminal intention or which is done either using computer systems or the internet or targeting computer systems or internet, would qualify as cybercrime. A lot of activities, a lot of definitions. These are some for your perusal. There's criminal activities such as fraud, theft, distribution of child pornography, which is all coming within the ambit of cybercrime. At the end of the day, there is no one standard definition. Today, cyber criminals are in a race amongst themselves to come up with the new vistas, new manifestations, new avatars of cyber crimes as we actually go forward. So we're going to see new kinds of manifestations as we go forward. Now, even vesting itself in the form of cyber radicalization, disrupting the working of computer systems, and cyber terrorism. So when this electricity grid of Mumbai got attacked, it was also a classical case of cyber terrorism, because they wanted to create specifically terror in the minds of people. That look, if we can actually down your grid for a couple of hours, we can actually usher in darkness in your life. And that actually was ultimately aimed to create distrust or mistrust in the ability of the government to protect its citizens. Well, cybercrime has come a long way. Initially, it was just classical cyber crimes, then mobile came across, then all kinds of mobile crimes became an integral part of the same. Now, I was the counsel for India's first cybercrime conviction way back in 2003. This 18 years back when I was representing Sony, and we got a conviction against a guy who had misused the credit card number of an American girl on a Sony website. We were very happy. We thought, now the doors are going to open up. Yes, some cybercrime convictions followed thereafter, but then came the IT amendments to the IT Act in 2008. They made a fundamental change. They made almost all cybercrimes as bailable offenses, and consequently, getting convictions became a tall order. But when I look at the landscape, I find that there are broadly three categories of cybercrimes that exist. One is cybercrimes against property. When you target a property, it could be computer system, it could be data, it could be hacking, cracking, damage to computer source code. The second category is cybercrimes against persons. When you target a particular person, whether it's by means of cyber stalking, cyber bullying, cyber harassment, and the like. And the third was cybercrimes against nations, which typically consist of cyber terrorism and cyber war. Of course, the coming of social media has brought in new ramifications in the form of social media crimes like trolling, which have not specifically been addressed under the law. When I look at cyber crimes, there are huge ramifications. One is a reputational ramification. People in India still have this mental scar or a social stigma that should they report cybercrime, people will look down upon that. I think that mindset now needs to change. Today, almost everybody in the world is going to be victim of some cybercrime or the other. So being quiet is not the option. You will have to report this. Of course, you may or may not be very successful in finding out the relevant cooperation from the law enforcement agencies. But now the government of India has come up with a new portal called cybercrime.gov.in, which actually allows you to report any cybercrime from any part of the country as well. Please remember, these cybercrimes are growing, their cost is growing, their impact on society, and the huge psychological havoc that these cybercrimes are invoking upon the target victims is constantly growing. Therefore, somewhere down the line as we go forward, cyber security will have to be adopted as a way of life. And this will apply across the board to all stakeholders. You can't expect the government to protect your cyber security if you're going to be careless, because we are all links of a big chain of cyber security ecosystem. And the chain be as strong as the weakest link. Further, on top of it, we are having this huge flood of fake news all around. Don't think it's only fake news pertaining to politicians or to public figures. There's so much of fake news around education institutions, around rumors in educational institutions in India that I'm now begun to start seeing. India doesn't have a dedicated law on fake news, but I've seen so many cases where specifically during the pandemic, the children and the students have become very innovative. So they have started inventing, imaginative stories of affairs, of sexual rendezvous between teachers, between principals, and posting them on websites with full names, and in some websites with the photographs of the concerned teachers or educationists taken from the official website of the education institution where they teach. And that suddenly starts creating a havoc. Why? Because now, the moment people Google these guys, this kind of a content comes up first. And Google has a stated policy. It's not going to remove content till such time you get them a court order. And right now, in the landmark judgment of the Delhi High Court, in the case of X versus Union of India, which got delivered on 19th of April 2021, the Delhi High Court has given exhaustive guidelines of the remedies to people who become victims of cyberbullying, cyber trolling, and sexual harassment. I was assisting the Delhi High Court in that particular matter, the amicus. Further now, coming of AI is adding to the entire confusion. Artificial intelligence is now being used for committing cybercrimes. Go to the darknet and start seeing how some of these websites are offering cybercrime as a service using artificial intelligence. So if you don't want to dirty your hands, go to the darknet and order for a cyber criminal activity. Only thing you have to pay by Bitcoins, then you are relatively, you think you are safe. But then now law enforcement agencies are also begun to start cracking, as recently the European Union has come up with a new proposal for an artificial intelligence act a few weeks back. You think you're dealing with coins and that grants you complete immunity from all tracing? Think again. Law enforcement agencies are working again. Yes, blockchain is being used for positive things, by countries for electronic authentication and retention, and in the banking sector. But these currencies are now increasingly being used for paying cybercrime activities. So if you are not dirtying your hands and paying through bitcoins and you think you cannot be tracked, think again. There are now some new challenges that are waiting as you go forward. Think you want to use Internet of Things as a way for targeting people? You could potentially do that, but always think that you're going to be playing with fire. Why? Because yes, you are correct. There are no internationally accepted norms on cybersecurity on the Internet of Things. So you can use the Alexas or the Echos of the world to create havoc to the owners of these devices. But think again, if you get caught, you will have a humongous problem at hand. And now, while there's good news that facial recognition is going to allow the face to be seen beyond the face masks, very quickly, this kind of technology is also going to be misused by cyber criminals as we go forward. Darknet continues to be the dark underbelly of the internet, where cybercrime is the economic model and where it's increasingly growing in size. As per last estimates, it's 500 times the size of the superficial net. You're right. In a number of cybercrime matters, attribution is a big challenge. You cannot invariably attribute a cybercriminal activity to a cyber actor, most of who's suave and sophisticated technically. But if you are an amateur, if you are a student, and if you are in your own world and you think you can do any cybercriminal activity and you can't be getting caught, really think again. These are happening differently. Yes, a lot of people are using servers located outside the country to commit cyber crimes. But while internet jurisdiction is a challenge, in a number of cases, the law enforcement agencies are able to get information, which including incriminating electronic evidence from service providers. Yes, there are challenges before law enforcement agencies. Cybercrime is not their topmost priority. They have other problems like rape, kidnapping, murder to take care of. But then they also have the requisite tools to deal with these cybercrime matters. And for dealing with this problem of anonymity, a lot of these Indian law enforcement agencies have now tied up in terms of collaboration agreements with the service providers. So if you think Google is located outside your country and you think your state police is not going to have access to the logs from Google, think again. Google now has agreements with Indian law enforcement agencies, which allows them to share information to the law enforcement agencies on their official requests once they make. So much even have a dedicated portal where the law enforcement agencies can log in and request for such information. So there are challenges for cyber crimes, but the fact remains is that increasingly, if you leave behind something, which is a form of an incriminating electronic evidence, just think again, it could be a Damocles sword that could be hanging for you in the times to come. These very strange times of the pandemic that we are looking at, there are problems that we are seeing in the form of detection, investigation, and prosecution of cybercrime. That's an integral part of it. But once the law enforcement agencies really want to go after cyber criminals, they really can do so. That's a broad message that's there. Yes, including the so much of these now IoT cybercrime cases that we are currently doing. So don't think that the IoT cybercrime cases and their investigations are only limited to Americas of the world. It's now very much happening in India's. Now, in this kind of a global ecosystem, where do we stand in India? In India, please realize that if you are using any of the 7 raw materials in today's ecosystem, you get covered under the Indian cyber law. So if you use computers, computer systems, computer networks, computer resources, communication devices, as also data and information in the electronic form, you get covered under this cyber law. Now, this is not a dedicated cybercrime law, but the Parliament in its wisdom added another chapter called Chapter Roman 11, which has title offenses. It's made various acts as cybercrimes. The mother provision in that is Section 66, which deals with variety of computer-related offenses. So if you do various activities without the permission of the owner or person in charge of a computer system or computer network, including unauthorized access, including downloading, copying, extracting data, including adding computer contaminants, damaging a computer system, or destroying, deleting, or altering data, or prejudicially influencing or impacting its value or utility, you all commit cyber crimes under Section 66 of the IT Act. IT Amendment Act has actually added a number of new other cybercrimes. Identity theft is a big cybercrime. Dealing with stolen computer resources, knowing that they are stolen, is a cybercrime. Then cheating by personation, by using a computer resource, is a cybercrime. And also, if you engage in cyber terrorism, it's a heinous offense punishable with life imprisonment, fine. For obscenity and for obscene content, we have a trinity of provisions under section 67, 67A, and 67B of the IT Act. Please note that in the year 2000, we only had section 67, which was a generic provision for online obscenity. And one of the big criticisms of the IT Act was that it was a general provision, you didn't have anything specific. So consequently, the IT amendments in the year 2008 added two more new sections, being section 66, 67A, talking about publishing of electronic content having explicit sexual act or conduct, and 67B talking about child pornography, serious offenses punishable with imprisonment. A lot of other offenses, cybercrimes under the law, including misrepresentation, breach of confidentiality and privacy, disclosure of information in breach of lawful contract, publishing electronic signatures false in certain particulars, or publication for fraudulent purposes. So don't be under the mistaken notion that nothing is happening on cybercrimes in the country. Here are a list of number of cases where cybercrime convictions have happened in the country. And these are all documented and are available. So from the time of the first cybercrime conviction of Arif Azim in 2003, we've seen a series of convictions, and these convictions are still also in the pipeline. In this entire ecosystem, what role do intermediaries have? I think those guys have massive roles. Why? Because they are the immensely powerful data repositories of our times. The Googles of this world know far more about me than my family, my wife, my children, my parents. This is thanks to all my activities that I'm doing on Google. So these guys are constantly monitoring these activities, making logs of these activities, and as and when there's a request from the law enforcement agencies, they're sharing these information with the law enforcement agencies. And come 25th of February 2021, we've now seen a change in the landscape. The Information Technology Rules 2021 have now been notified and implemented. Under these rules, it's now been made mandatory for all service providers and intermediaries to mandatorily give all information that's going to be asked from them by the law enforcement agencies, whether it's for cracking or detecting, investigating cyber crimes or for cybersecurity breaches. And if they don't give that information, then these rules say that there will be criminal liability. That means that if they don't give this information to law enforcement agencies for investigation of cyber crimes, then they themselves, as companies and their top managements, are liable to be punished for offenses under the Information Technology Act and also under the Penal Code. So it's a very classical kind of a new legislative model that the IT Rules 2021 have elaborated. You as a service provider, you give us all information, we ask. That's what the law enforcement agencies are saying. You do not give us information, no problem. We will lodge cybercrime cases against you and get you to face criminal prosecution in India. That's what the new things are. So when I look at these new cybercrimes that are emerging, huge list. This is just an elaborative, illustrative list of what kind of cybercrimes are existing. There's a DDoS attacks, and there are ransomware attacks, and there is phishing, which has become the #1 cybercrime during COVID-19 times. We've seen online financial frauds, and of course, we've seen big time other fraud. Well, the fact is that the IT Rules 2009, actually, the amendments in 2008 and the rules in 2009 and 2011 actually made a majority of cybercrimes as bailable offenses, so that had an impact on convictions. But now, more and more people are using during COVID-19 times video conferencing. So if you think video conferencing is innocuous, really think again. There's a lot of logs that are being generated and kept somewhere or the other. And the law enforcement could have access to the same. And if you think you're going to use video conferencing for engaging in undesirable content, think again, because that content is again going to be potentially summoned by the law enforcement agencies, because that will be the relevant electronic evidence. Already now the law pertaining to electronic evidence has been changed. Prior to the pandemic, one used to say that one in every 5 cases would have electronic evidence component. Now, with the coming of pandemic and the increasing reliance on cyberspace, I can easily say that 1 out of every 3 cases has got electronic evidence component. Law pertaining to electronic evidence was earlier decided in Anwar PV versus PK Bashir in 2014 by Supreme Court. And then we started seeing new changes. This law effectively said, if you all have to comply with Section 65B of the Evidence Act, because that's a mandatory code in its own self. You have to fulfill all the conditions. You have to give a certificate along with electronic records you will be producing in a court of law. That must detail the manner how the electronic evidence has been created. That must furnish the details of the devices that were used. It must be signed by the relevant person who is responsible for running of the said, for generation of the said electronic evidence. Now, we had some variant or divergent viewpoints of the Supreme Court in a later judgment of Shafi Muhammad versus state of Himachal Pradesh, where the Supreme Court said, if you don't have the original device, no problem. Don't give the certificate under 65B of the Evidence Act. So that created immense confusion. Consequently, now this confusion has been set today by the constitutional judgment, a bench judgment of the Supreme Court in the case of Arjun Pandit Rao Khotkar versus Kailash Kushan Rao Gorantal. This is a July 2020 judgment where this constitutional bench of the Supreme Court says 65B of the Evidence Act is a mandatory provision. You have to mandatorily comply with the same. Hence, in the light of this new legal developments, the need for capacity building becomes massively immense. Training is the need of the hour. Everybody requires training, even the judges of the International Court of Justice. I was fortunate enough to conduct training programs for the judges of the International Court of Justice at The Hague and also for the officers of the International Court of Justice. And I found that there were so many other questions that these judges and these officers were actually putting up, which effectively means there's a need for more capacity building. The portal of the government, cybercrime.gov.in, has been playing a remarkable role in terms of encouraging more people to report cybercrimes. And once they get reported, a trigger gets triggered, in the sense somewhere down the line, some file starts moving on. You don't know when, at what point of time it's going to take what particular stuff. Clearly, there's an international Budapest Convention on cybercrime of Council of Europe, but India is still not a member of the Budapest Convention as we go. There are practical difficulties being faced by law enforcement agencies, more so during lockdowns when they're fighting coronavirus times, and when getting the electronic evidence is becoming a big challenge. The law enforcement agencies are also seeing new challenges that the work from home have begun to start throwing up. We've seen some number of companies who are finding their data being stolen, misused, abused by employees who are working from home. And there are immense cyber attacks on the people who are working from home through their devices. There's one survey which tells us that there is a 246% increase in cyber attacks targeted against workers who are working from home. I think we have to be prepared for a new future. In my new book, New Cyber World Order Post-COVID-19, I've categorically examined the transformation of cyberspace during COVID-19. And I've realized that by the time the world gets victorious in the fight against the current and subsequent wave of infections of COVID-19, we will enter into a new cyberspace where states will become very powerful. This new cyber world order will be characterized by cybercrime and increasing cybersecurity breaches, and whether we could even see a migration of users from the superficial net into the dark net. So I think as all of us as digital stakeholders, we should be prepared to now face the new cyber world order. Therefore, capacity building is the only name of the game. Whatever levels of whatever expertise or professional development that you are in, everybody would require capacity building. It's here. This online university, of which I am the honorary chancellor, we are trying to push the envelope in terms of evolving cyber law jurisprudence. Cyber Law University offers various international certification courses. And these courses have been done by more than 25,800 students from 172 countries, speaking 52 national languages. These courses are not just on cyber law, cybercrime law, cyber security law, but also of artificial intelligence law. These are 3-month courses. In addition, we set up with the NLU Ranchi for an undergraduate certificate course in cyber law. Apart from that, we have a postgraduate course in cyber law, but more significantly, we also have a number of short courses. These are 25 hours courses on various subjects of cyber law, cybercrime law, cyber security law, artificial intelligence law, blockchain law, the Internet of Things law. So I think we realize that is important that's happening in this space. We put that in these courses. I've personally customized and developed these courses because I realize people don't have time. So if you only have 25 hours, we want to give you the latest of what's happening in the 25 hours so that you can be updated with what's the latest that's happening. So I think therefore capacity building becomes massive, and capacity building in the context of educational institutions also has to be an ongoing phenomenon. There has to be adoption of cyber security. You will also have to adopt cyber resilience, cyber hygiene as a methodology. If you are becoming a victim of cybercrime, don't be silent. Start reporting. Don't think what others are going to think about you, because reporting is the first time of the cycle. More significantly, if you're engaging in any cyber criminal activity, really think again. I can tell you, the IT Act is like a bhavar, is like a whirlpool. Once you get stuck in a matter under the IT Act, it can take you years before you come out of it. Today in 2021, I'm doing a 2001 matter, 20 years old matter under the IT Act, which I've been doing. So don't be under the mistaken notion that because it's a cybercrime matter, it's going to be decided fast and you'll be out of it. No, it could take 20 years and therefore could completely change the context of the digital future that's going to be happening. Cybercrime is now going to be an integral part of our existence as we go forward. So in this context, now that we have had this discussion, I want to now come back to the scenario of this increasing cybercriminal activities that's happening in educational institutions. I've been advising a number of educational institutions on cybercrime activities by children, by students. Now, students feel the community standards have changed. So actually giving an expletive or a gali within the course of an online class is no great deal. What you don't realize is that once you give a gali online, you've actually created an electronic record, which is in the form of sound. Whether if you're on video, it's also in the form of video. And once you've given that gali online, which is transmitted, you've not just published the said gali, but you've also gone ahead and transmitted it. In any case, you've gone ahead and caused the said gali to be published and transmitted in the electronic form. Now, the moment you do that, that comes within the parameter of Section 67 of the IT Act, gets you 3 years jail time, 5 lakh rupees fine. Now, you will say, look, everybody gives galis, so what's the problem? And if I've given some gali, or I've got some angry in the online class, or I've hurled some sexual abuses, think again. Every man steals. The man who gets caught is a thief. So we have to be careful that we don't get caught. And in case if any kind of electronic evidence is attributable to us, we could be in trouble. Now, a lot of students believe, oh, I know technology from the back of my hand, and therefore nobody can catch me. That's a mindset. So much so that students are very condescending in terms of their approaches on technology to their own families, to their own parents, because they feel their parents know nothing, and these students can just go about and rewire anything on technology. That's the reason why lots of time students want to create anonymous accounts. First and foremost, let me begin by saying there's nothing known as anonymous accounts. Even if you create a false account in the name of somebody else, maybe on a Gmail, maybe on a Yahoo or on a Microsoft, that may be anonymous from your perspective. It's no longer anonymous because the service provider has got complete details of the exact internet protocol address that was used by you for the purposes of creating that anonymous ID. You can be in your ivory tower and think it's anonymous. It's not anonymous because you can be identified. That's why if you are actually sending out some communication from an anonymous email account, and you think that nobody will be able to track you, that also think again, because if the matter gets reported to law enforcement agencies, the law enforcement agencies will be able to get exact details of yours, including your internet protocol addresses, within a very short period of time. And then mapping the internet protocol address to the concerned person is child's play, because all these service providers are located in India. The police asks them to map them and the police and the law enforcement agencies invariably get the exact location that this particular IP address was allocated to Mr. ABC at this address. Now, a lot of times your students don't realize that by your activities in cyberspace, you could effectively be landing your parents in trouble. So during the lockdown, we've had a case where one of the parents had to face some severe consequences thanks to the activities of their wards. Now, one of the wards, who's a child, not exactly a child, he's about 17, and he's studying in school. So he managed to effectively send a very kind of a threatening message to the principal of the school. So consequently, the message was reported, the matter was identified, and the IP address was located. And the police went ahead and arrested the father of the concerned child because the internet connection was in the name of the father. And the law presumes that the cybercrime is done by the concerned person to whom the said internet protocol address has been legally allocated. So we should not land up doing any activities which could land our parents, our peers into potential trouble. There are immense challenges. If you think that law enforcement agencies are busy in fighting COVID-19, they can't track you, really think again. Today, a lot of cybercrime prosecutions, cases are being registered and prosecutions are underway because COVID-19 is only one aspect of our existence. Other things are also beginning to get started. So in this entire ecosystem, I just conclude by saying that we have to exercise due diligence when we do activities online. If we have done something, the best way, if I'm you, is going to own it up and apologize so that the institution concerned does not take action. Now, if the institution is going to be legally advised, it's going to take legal action. If it's going to take legal action, and should the FIR be registered against the concerned students, then as the Honorable Vice Chancellor said, it could have an extremely detrimental and prejudicial impact upon the future of the concerned student. And more significantly, such kind of activities actually have a very negative impact upon the perception or the reputation of the concerned institution where you're living in or where you're actually studying. Because at the end of the day, everybody sees your particular institution in a particular light. So there are a lot of things that you have to keep in mind. Yes, that's why I always say never act in haste, never repent at leisure, never publish anything without adhering to the golden principle of 10, which is if you've prepared something and you want to publish it, please close your eyes and count from 1 to 10 and ask yourself, is this something that I want to be published? Will it impact or harm somebody? If the answer is that it will impact someone or harm someone, please don't publish it. It's better to err on the side of caution. I know in India, we are experiencing a new revolution. I call it the Great Indian Vomiting Revolution. This is the revolution where Indians are vomiting information about their personal, professional, social lives without even understanding the legal ramifications for the same. But I believe that we will have to somehow take cogent steps to come out of the Great Indian Vomiting Revolution. Let's not be in a hurry to get a huge hordes of friends online. Let's not be in a hurry to publish in a great hurry and repent at leisure. Let's learn to exercise due diligence and caution as we go forward. Cybercrime is an evolving paradigm. It's continuously growing. The aspects pertaining to cybercrime investigations are constantly getting more and more polished. I regularly teach at the National Police Academy in Hyderabad and the National Judicial Academy in Bhopal. And I can tell you, we've got some wonderful officers in the law enforcement agencies, wonderful judges who know these nuances. And they are able to immediately grasp the technical aspects of this matter. So just as a final parting thoughts, cybercrime is here to stay. It will be a lifelong companion, but let's learn to have an arm's length distance from cybercrime. Let's not consciously or unconsciously engage in doing any activity which can prejudicially impact our reputation, goodwill, standing in society, or which could prejudicially mar my potential future prospects or future opportunities that I'm likely to say. But take steps that you don't become victims of cybercrime. And if you have become victim of cybercrime, please don't be silent. Suffering in silence is worse. Report the matter to cybercrime cells, to the cybercrime reporting portal at cybercrime.gov.in, and just take that cybercrime as a wake-up call, as a great lesson from which you can take your learnings. So what all not to do in the coming times so that you subsequently do not become victim of cybercrime. I hope I've able to just give some of my thoughts on this evolving paradigm of cyber crimes and how these cyber crimes and cyberbullying in educational institutions are evolving and how students need to be careful. Thank you, but I'll be happy to answer any specific questions. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. Indeed, a pleasure to have you with us today. We enjoyed each and every minute of this discussion, and this is definitely going to prove worthy of remembering for a lifetime. I would like to request our registrar, Dr. Yogesh Pratap Singh, sir, to conclude this webinar with a vote of thanks.
Prakhar, is there any question?
Yes, so there are
We
4 or
we
5
can take
questions.
2-3
Okay.
questions, important questions. Yes,
Okay, so I'll read them out and we can take.
yes.
Harshvardhan Singh asks, Sir, now cryptocurrency is the new source for ransom in the cyber world. And I guess that's where the question
So let
gets
me
over.
pause and answer that question as we go forward. Yes, cryptocurrencies are the new fuel that are fueling ransomware. Today, whenever somebody attacks you by a ransomware attacks, they want ransom in the form of a currency that cannot be traceable. Or like law enforcement agencies will have immense problems in tracing. So therefore, Bitcoin is the most preferred cryptocurrency globally that's used. In India, the government of India has said that cryptocurrencies like Bitcoins are illegal. I think it's a very short-sighted approach because you cannot adopt an ostrich approach to the sun which is rising on the horizon. Cryptocurrencies are the new present and the new bright future for tomorrow. So very quickly, nations will have to start looking at legally recognizing cryptocurrencies and start getting benefit from the same. But yes, if you are using cryptocurrencies for ransomware operations, then clearly this is now the new predominant phenomenon. Interpol has now started giving training to law enforcement agencies on how they can use new techniques for purposes of identifying the people who are dealing with these cryptocurrencies. So they may relatively look to be more safer right now, but as in I say in this transient world, nothing is safe. What is safe yesterday is not safe today. So handle it with cryptocurrency with care. And in case if you're using it for cybercrime as a service, handle it with even greater care. Because in case if it gets ultimately tracked down or you are found having an access to that exercise, you could be sucked in a cybercrime prosecution case. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Second question is, what does transmitting of obscene material include? There are many explicit and inappropriate contents that are circulated, forwarded over social media on the pretext of spreading awareness, protests, etc. So the one who is circulating or forwarding those contents are not held liable, right? Does that not count as a cybercrime?
Okay, thank you for this wonderful question. This is one question that's invariably in everybody's mind. What is obscene? I get so many of content as a person, as an internet user, which could be seen to be obscene. On social media, there's so much of obscene content that's happening. How does one determine what's obscene? So when I look at Section 67 of the IT Act, it does not use the word obscene. It uses the word anything which is lascivious or which appeals to the prurient interests, or the effect of which is to tend to deprave and corrupt the minds of those who are likely to see, read, and hear the same. This is the exact language that they have picked up from Section 292 of the Indian Penal Code. This is the exact language which has been upheld by the Supreme Court in 1971 in the case of Ranjit Udeshi versus State of Maharashtra by the Supreme Court. Supreme Court has distinctly said we are not going to give you any kind of a definition of what's obscene. Instead, we would want all of us to be guided by the Hicklin test of the Privy Council, which said that we can't tell you what's obscene, but once you show it to me, I can let you know whether it's obscene. The effect that it has on my mind, that was the fundamental focus of the Hicklin test. So that's what the test that in the context of cyber matters is still being used. So according to you, something which is nude may not be obscene, but somebody who sees it may be seeing it as obscene. Well, even if it's not nude, maybe it's something erotic could also be seen to be something which could come within the ambit of obscene. Ultimately, who will determine what's obscene will be two elements. Number one, the law enforcement agencies. Number two, the judiciary. So please be careful. Keep in mind the Hicklin test. And if you have this mistaken notion that I can engage in all kinds of obscene content and yet not face legal consequences, then you are mistaken. First and foremost, let me clarify. There is no law passed in India by the Parliament which bans, bars, or prohibits the viewing of pornographic or obscene content. So you could continue to view that. The law has no problem with that. The law has a problem the moment you publish, transmit, or cause to be published or transmitted the said content. Except in the context of child pornography, the law has made a big exception under Section 67B of the IT Act, where the law says even when you browse child pornography, it becomes an offense. So the moment you have some obscene content coming up on your social media or on WhatsApp, if you are seeing it, that's okay, no problem. The moment you start sharing it, you publish it, you transmit it, and you cause the same to be published and transmitted, you come into the arena of criminal prosecution under Section 67, 67A, and 67B of the IT Act. If you are an admin of a group and there is obscene content that's going across, there's a lot of confusion happening. First, people said WhatsApp group admins are going to be liable. Then we had some judgments. There was a judgment from Chennai which said, no, they can't be held liable. But now the IT rules 2021, which have come into effect from 25th of February 21, have completely changed the landscape. They've said as an admin, if you're an admin of a WhatsApp group, and if something has been transmitted, you're required to exercise due diligence, which means you'll have to have detailed rules and regulations, privacy policy, which must be circulated to all the members of the WhatsApp group. And you must also get their consent to such rules and regulations and privacy policy. And the moment somebody complains to you about something which is obscene, then it's your duty to remove or disable access to the same within 24 hours. You can either do that voluntarily or you can do it on getting of a court order. But if you don't remove it within 24 hours, then you are going to be in the same capacity as a co-accused. So the current legal position is, if you are an admin of a WhatsApp group, if you exercise due diligence, you follow the parameters of the IT rules, then you are not going to be held liable for obscene content that gets published or floated on your WhatsApp group. But in case if you are going to be a mute spectator, then you are going to be sucked in criminal liability in a similar capacity as that of a co-accused. So it's a very gray zone. Please be careful when you walk and tread or dealing with content that has got obscene or pornographic elements. Thanks.
Moving to the next question, cyber ostracism and body shaming by memes, trolling and abusing a person and his personal life through different pages is also a new space for troubling already depressed person. What can we do for it?
The first thing that we can do is recognize their existence. You cannot close your eyes to the same. Whether it's cyber trolling, bullying, body shaming, troubling you through memes, these are now ground realities. We will have to start developing a thick skin on it. If the content is something which is grossly offensive or is violative of the law, you have the option to please go ahead and report to the law enforcement agencies. But please remember the fundamental golden principle. Don't hit back. Don't respond. The moment you engage in a conversation with the perpetuator of this kind of a content, it actually is a validation of his criminal thought process. It actually emboldens him to go ahead and engage on far more nastier behaviors for purposes of targeting you. Try as far as possible, if you can, just let things go. Try to report the matter to law enforcement agencies. Don't aggravate any discussions online. Don't get very angry online. Try to avoid confrontation. If you're going to be quiet while reporting this to law enforcement agencies, over some time you will find that this kind of a content could potentially go away. India has not yet come up with a right to be forgotten, but the Personal Data Protection Bill 2019 before the Parliament is going to give us some kind of a right to be forgotten. And should that become the law of the land, we could potentially have the right to get this kind of content ultimately deleted by the service providers. But that's a long way. As of now, exercise due diligence and caution, and avoid getting into confrontation, avoid getting publicly angry, or avoid engaging in fights online, because that's only going to further complicate the scenario and increase your headaches. Thanks.
Okay, so the last question for today. Is India in a dire need of a regulatory body merely for cyberspace, not mentioning the data protection, but a different regulatory body altogether for cyberspace?
India as a nation appears to be lost in the woods. It doesn't yet have a cogent legal approach to cyberspace. We, as a nation, have always been a nation of reactions. We react rather than proactively think. That's why we have not been able to amend our Indian IT Act since the last 13 years. Actually, cyberspace doesn't appear to be a topmost priority from the governmental standpoint. That's fine. That's the reason why one finds that the requisite proactive approaches that the government should be doing in terms of cybercrime prevention, in terms of tackling cybersecurity issues, is clearly not happening. Let me give you an example. We still don't have a dedicated law on cybercrime. You know, we in India are obsessed with Bollywood films. So we are so much inspired by the Bollywood masala film schedule or the manner of making films. We like to have masala films. We like to put masala of everything. So even under the IT Act, it's a manifestation of a Bollywood masala film. A different kind of masalas, whether it's of electronic commerce, of electronic governance, of cybercrime, of electronic authentication that have been fed. I have been of the firm opinion that India requires dedicated cybercrime laws because a mere chapter 11 of the IT Act and mere about a couple of sections under the IT Act is not good enough to enable India to fight the fight against cybercrime in an effective and efficacious manner. But we haven't had a dedicated law on cybercrime at a time when so many countries have begun to start having dedicated national cybersecurity laws, whether it's China, Singapore, Vietnam, Australia, Thailand. I find India much behind the curve. We are not even begun talking of a need for a dedicated cybersecurity law. There's no one nodal agency in the country on cyber-related matters. And cyberspace appears to be a very fertile battlefield for potential turf battles between different ministries. I think all that has to be given up. We need to have a holistic approach to cyberspace. We need to have a holistic national authority in that particular regard. We need to have specific holistic approaches to deal with cyber crimes independently, apart from dealing with cybersecurity on a different platform. We need to have a holistic approach on newly emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, blockchain, Internet of Things. There's lots that required to be done. But ultimately, all that will only ultimately get done once there's an appropriate political will. Till such time that does not happen, this reactive piecemeal approach of dealing with the challenges of cyberspace is potentially going to be relied upon, which may not be very, very effective for India as a nation. Mind you, please realize if India wants to be an IT superpower, we will have to come up with cogent, effective, and holistic responses and approaches to deal with cyberspace as a paradigm. Thanks.
Also, sir, one last question has also come up. As you mentioned, one should report if one is a victim of cyberbullying or sexual harassment. The millennials are not aware how do we report, or sometimes they are in a state of shock or denial, or their parents do not wish to indulge in any controversy. In such cases of silence, how do we resolve it at the university level?
See, if these kinds of situations are coming in and students don't want to report, then at a university level, there's a number of things that I would want any university to do. First thing, the university needs to understand that it is today become a service provider, a network service provider. And hence the university has become an intermediary under the Information Technology Act. Therefore, the first thing that I would want the university to do is to protect its back. Please do its documented compliances as an intermediary under the IT Act and rules and regulations made thereunder. Number two, I would want universities to have specific rules and regulations and policies pertaining to cyber behavior. There needs to be specific policies against cyberbullying, cyber trolling, and cyber crimes. Today, problem is most of the universities are again lost in the woods. They don't have any dedicated policies in that regard. You go to their websites, you don't find anything in that regard. So there's nothing even informing students of what the university wants you to do, on what you not to do while using cyberspace. Now, for what students do outside the university hours is not the headache of the university. But for what students do on the university platforms or computer resources of the university or during university time is distinctly the headache of the university. So I would expect university to have dedicated anti-cyberbullying policies and anti-cybercrime declarations and policies in place. I would want the universities to have a grievance mechanism They must appoint a grievance officer whose only job will be to look at all grievances of all university stakeholders who have any problem pertaining to cyber issues. And the grievance officer must be mandated to work on the grievance and close it within 15 days, because that's the mandate of the law under the new IT rules 2021. Further, I would encourage the university to enhance more capacity building amongst students, amongst teachers, and amongst other stakeholders in the society, in the university ecosystem. Why? Because most of them are pretty much clueless about what's happening and what are the legal ramifications. A lot of times, parents don't want their wards' names to be shared by the university. So the university first must invoke appropriate confidence from the parents by coming up with a policy which will say that we are going to withhold the identity of the particular student complaining, until the student or the parents have no problems in the sharing of the identity. Even when I look at the latest judgment of X versus Union of India by the Delhi High Court has upheld the right of this girl who's affected by any kind of obscene content to remain anonymous and to ensure that her identity is hidden. So if we can actually follow these principles in X versus Union of India and hide the identity of the person who's going to be complaining, that is going to be a great factor in terms of encouraging large number of students to actually report these cyberbullying matters. Because cyberbullying has now become a kind of a pandemic, shall I say. Almost anybody and everybody is engaging in cyberbullying because they realize nothing is going to happen. So university, what will they do? They can do nothing. The police in our area is far behind. We are in a backward area. There's no problem. We can do whatever and we can get away. Now that mindset needs to be demolished. For that, I think appropriate capacity building needs to be done amongst all students generally about cyberbullying, about cyber crimes, about cyber hygiene. And as far as possible, the university should also have a cyber code of conduct, which should basically be a collation of what kind of principles does the university want the students to follow should they engage in e-learning or cyber resources. Today, thanks to the pandemic, all universities have to go online and are teaching online. But is there any mechanism to tell students what is the university expecting you to do when you are part of the online e-learning module or e-teaching course? There is no way. So if tomorrow somebody violates or does something objectionable, he can always say, sir, the university doesn't have any rules. The university never told me so. Yes, if it's in violation of the law, then it's a different ballgame altogether. But there's a lot of a gray space which lies prior to the invocation of legal provisions. And therefore, if a university has a cyber code of conduct, that should be now as detailed as possible. That should evolve what about basic hygiene methodologies or practices or procedures that the university would want its student to have. That could be a good starting point. The university also must get the consent of every student to the said code of conduct, to the said rules and regulations and policies. Just merely putting it on the website of the university will not be sufficient. You must get the specific consent of every stakeholder, and you must be in a position to save that electronic consent along with the internet protocol address and the headers and footers in your backend, so that tomorrow, if anything is found to be done by a student, which is in violation of even the norms, that grants the university the adequate mechanism to take effective action against a student. This could be in the form of just a warning, could be suspension, could even be termination. But in case if the university doesn't have these frameworks, then the job of the university becomes even more complicated. But ultimately, it's more capacity building, and students have to be ultimately told that, look, please use the positives of the internet and social media. Do not use negatives, because the university is not going to think twice before taking action against you. And I think universities should, as a matter of abundant precaution, always take a test case and just take some action, so that a message is given to the entire student and the entire ecosystem that the university is not going to be a silent spectator should you be violating the norms expected by the university cyber rules and regulations and the policies, so that becomes a ground. So even if in a scenario like this, if somebody has violated the norms, the university can take the action of either suspending him or terminating him, either way. So the message goes much louder and simpler and clearer to the entire ecosystem. Everybody comes to the line. So whether the matter is finally reported to the law enforcement or not is of no consequence. Here, the university becomes an ecosystem in its own self. And once that happens, that university starts getting quoted as a model to be followed by other universities, that this is the kind of stuff that we would want to follow. That's the kind of a vision that I would have, that I would want universities to follow. And I think the NLU Odisha could potentially even take a lead in this regard, because none of the universities are doing what I have talked about. If we start doing that, then I think maybe the NLU Odisha model could be the model that a lot of universities could potentially follow in the coming times, and which could usher in a new kind of a phase. But ultimately, capacity building will have to be constantly the new mantra for all stakeholders in this space. Thanks.
Thank you so much for those suggestions, sir. Both of our major stakeholders are already here in the session. I'm sure that they might have already started to plan in mind and execute the same at NLU as well. So, Yogesh sir, I guess all the questions have been answered.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Prakhar. It was indeed a very great learning experience for all of us. We immensely enjoyed, sir. We completely agree with you that cybercrime has become a constant companion, and each one of us are going to be affected in some or other way. It is a form of crime that takes advantage of flaws and the gray areas in complex information system and information infrastructure such as internet. The rapid expansion of e-commerce, e-governance, and widespread reliance on online services, financial transactions, and social interactions have created unprecedented opportunities for many types of criminal activities, especially fraud, cyber bullying, and so many other things which you mentioned. Deterring criminal activity in the digital age requires more robust legal regime, secured system, new enforcement mechanisms, international agreements also, as you suggested, that address the transnational nature of cybercrime. But above all, we need to emphasize more on users' education and capacity building so that people, especially the student community, they can realize the severity of these offenses, and they don't indulge either knowingly or unknowingly, intentionally or unintentionally. We have also taken note of the anti-cybercrime policy requirement, and will definitely do that. In fact, we have already started thinking on the same line, and this program was part of that process which we have begun, and we will definitely take your help also in this process, sir, and we'll try to make NLU Odisha as model in case of cyber regulation and cyber conduct policy. We are really grateful to you, sir, for agreeing to interact with our students and faculty members on such a short notice. We are really grateful on behalf of National Law University Odisha. We thank you, and we'll take your help in future also. It's going to be a long-term relationship. I thank Professor Ved Kumari also for organizing this lecture. This was indeed a great learning experience. I thank all the faculty members who have joined this program. I thank all the participants, participants who joined and asked very, very relevant questions. And I thank finally the social media committee who did all the arrangements for organizing this lecture. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, Professor Ved Kumari, for giving me this platform to exchange my thoughts. This has been a sheer pleasure. The kind of depth of the questions, the variety of questions, and the distinctive nuances that I've raised have only told us that everybody who's in this particular session is thinking, and there is so much more to do. So happy to be a part of your future initiatives. Looking forward to our collaboration, and we'll be happy to make the NLU Odisha as a model which other universities could also follow. But it's been a sheer pleasure. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.